morning, everyone. This is the first of two makeup sessions for Theology 401. The focus of what we're going to be talking about, for this session at least, will be Jewish mysticism. More specifically, we'll talk about what mysticism is, and you'll have some examples of how it's been defined. I hope also to draw your attention to I think an important set of passages in Gershom Sholom's Major Trends in Jewish Mysticism, which presents mysticism within a kind of historical context, which may be highly theoretical in certain respects, but I think is nonetheless very illuminating and very helpful for our purposes, because part of what he says is actually characteristic of and probably referring to some of the materials we have studied thus far, specifically within the context of the medieval Jewish philosophical tradition and how it viewed God. And with that in the background, keep that in mind since we've already covered that. It may be helpful to see mysticism and the rise of Jewish mysticism, at least at this point in time, as a reaction to some of the developments that we have already talked about, and then you can even see in Maimonides' famous 13 principles, at least the first 5 that discuss God. So what I'd like to do, first of all, is present a widely held view today of what mysticism is, with a comment or two on my own part regarding the implications of this. And then we will go on to consider a number of alternative ways of defining mysticism leading to that material by Gershom Sholom. Time permitting, I would like to discuss as much as I can of the article on mysticism by Moshe Idel, which has been assigned to you. I'm going to summarize the major themes in it and identify certain passages both from it and from other sources outside of it, for purposes of illustrating the main points that he makes. He divides mysticism, at least in the Jewish tradition, into 2 types: theosophic on the one hand and ecstatic on the other. He also has other adjectives for characterizing both, and I'll try to distinguish the 2 by focusing on all of the major observations he makes regarding the first category, theosophic mysticism first, and then going on to the categories and descriptive points he wants to make about the second type of mysticism, which is ecstatic mysticism. All right, that said, what is the working definition that I want to propose to you, and as one that is widely held today, and for good reason in many respects, because it is the suggestion of a remarkable scholar, an Israeli scholar by the name of Moshe Idel, who in an introductory work on Jewish mysticism offers the following, in fact the title of it is Mysticism, New Perspectives. Pardon me, Kabbalah, New Perspectives. That is the title of it. This is can be found on page 18. I have not assigned it to you. I am simply recapitulating it, which you can take my word for. He suggests that a phenomenon is mystical in nature when a contact with the divine is achieved, which is more intense and has greater spiritual impact than common religious experiences. I'm going to repeat that so that it will be easy to take down. A phenomenon is mystical in nature when a contact with the divine is achieved, which is more intense and has greater spiritual impact than common religious experiences. On this definition, mysticism is not a common religious experience, but insofar as it is intense and it involves a contact, otherwise undefined and unanalyzed, a contact with the divine, it is ipso facto mystical. If this definition is accepted, one of the consequences, it seems to me, that should be thought about is that prophecy, in every manifestation it has, insofar as it involves a prophet's contact with God, or sometimes more accurately, God's contact with a prophet, if one accepts that description, is ipso facto mystical. There are forms of prayer in which one can be intensively involved or deeply reflective, and this is likewise mystical. It is not so often clear that these two instances that I've just given to you would in fact reflect a mystical experience from the point of view of one who has a prophetic one, or for that matter, a reflective one in the context of prayer. Much depends on more information to be given. I bring this out because, at least the way Professor Edel has defined it at the outset, we are talking about mysticism as if not a common experience, a very, very recognizable and in some ways quite familiar experience. And I think it may take in more than, in fact, it actually should. And we'll see some reasons for that as we go on. What are some of the other suggestions that have been offered for what mysticism is? Well, let me give you one that is basically grounded in etymology. It comes from a former teacher of mine, the late Geddes McGregor. Used to teach religious studies at USC, also taught as an adjunct professor at Hebrew Union College in Los Angeles. In his writings, the word mysticism comes, as he points out, from the Greek root mu. That's mu. Put it in an underlined form or an italicized form. Mu as in the verb muo, M-U-O, or I keep silent. That's what muo means. Or as an alternative, I hold my tongue. Another way of rendering muo. It's an onomatopoetic. Onomatopoeia is the phenomenon. You may remember this from your poetry classes long ago, where the root mimics the sound. The root mimics the sound that a person makes when he or she deliberately closes their lips. And why deliberately close one's lips? Because there is something either inexpressible for good reasons. So you're saying something like or you can even find this, I think, in the one of the famous numbers in the Lion King, where one of the lions is not permitted to say something, so he says and that is keeping silent, even though he's trying to get something across. Okay. Another way of capturing the thought, and this is also mentioned by Geddes McGregor, is a familiar English expression. I'm sure you will all recognize it. Mum's the word. Mum is the equivalent of saying keeping silent, although appearing to communicate something. So the mystic is one who keeps silent, or who admits that he can't express the experience that he wishes to express, but can't. So that is one way of starting it, in the interpretation of what mysticism is and is about. There are others who make the following observation. I quote Yosef Dan, a great scholar of mysticism, a student of Gershom Scholem, who makes this observation on a study he wrote some years ago called Ancient Jewish Mysticism. There is no purpose in the frequent attempts in the scholarly literature to define mysticism in a positive form, which states its characteristics, because the term applies to a realm which is proclaimed from the start as unknown, hidden, and concealed. This does not simply mean unknown to some person at some specific time, but totally unknown, because it is simply impossible to describe and express using the tools of language and human experience. The term mystical is like the term darkness. It does not refer to something positive, but to an absence, as the absence of light is darkness, and the absence of the possibility of rational and sensory knowledge is mysticism. And we'll leave the rest of his remarks at that. There is a famous treatment of at least the characteristics of mysticism, which I'd like to call to your attention. It comes from an author you may very well have heard of. It was William James, the great American philosopher, psychologist, who was identified with the movement called pragmatism. He has a famous work called The Varieties of Religious Experience. And after considering a variety of ways in which the term mysticism has been taken, and he thinks probably misunderstood or misused, he suggests the following. To keep it useful by restricting it, I will do what I did in the case of the word religion, and simply propose to you 4 marks which, when an experience has them, may justify us calling it mystical for the purpose of the present lectures. In this way, we shall save verbal disputation and recriminations that generally go with the definitions that he mentioned and rejected. So what are the characteristics? He has some long paragraphs here. I'm going to try and make it a bit more abbreviated. The 4 characteristics are as follows. First, ineffability. I'll give as my own rendering of that. The inexpressibility of something. Ineffability, the handiest of the marks by which I classify a state of mind as mystical, is negative. The subject of it immediately says that it defies expression, that no adequate report of its contents can be given in words. It follows from this that its quality must be directly experienced, yet it cannot be imparted or transferred to others. In this peculiarity, mystical states are more like states of feeling than like states of intellect. Okay, that's the first one. Noetic quality, that's from the Greek word noesis, which is the act of understanding. So something that has a noetic quality, this is my introductory remarks, would have a quality by which it may nonetheless be understood in some sense. Although so similar to states of feeling, mystical states seem to those who experience them to be also states of knowledge. They are states of insight into depths of truth unplumbed by the discursive intellect. Discursive here means the kind of intellectual activity which involves discourses, analyses, arguments, explications, and the like. They are illuminations, revelations, full of significance and importance. All inarticulate, though, they remain. And as a rule, they carry with them a curious sense of authority for aftertime. In other words, these experiences, so hard, if not impossible, to express, are nonetheless in important ways authoritative for the person who experiences them. Third characteristic, transiency. Mystical states cannot be sustained for long, except in rare instances. Half an hour, or at most an hour or 2, seems to be the limit beyond which they fade into the light of common day. Often, when faded, their quality can but imperfectly be reproduced in memory, but when they recur, it, namely the experience, is recognized, and from one recurrence to another it is susceptible of continuous development in what is felt as inner richness and importance. So no matter how inexpressible or difficult to describe they are, these experiences are taken to be really significant. Okay? And fourth and finally, all the passivity, being passive, passivity. Although the oncoming of mystical states may be facilitated by preliminary, voluntary operations, that means activities, preparations of one sort or another, as by fixing the attention or going through certain bodily performances. Here it doesn't mean acting in a play, but doing certain things that are supposed to lead to the experience. Or in other ways which manuals of mysticism prescribe. Yet, when the characteristic sort of consciousness once has set in, the mystic feels as if his own will were in abeyance. That means completely set aside or disappearing. And indeed, sometimes as if he were grasped and held by a superior power. Hence the passivity. All right, that is another way of approaching it. It overlaps with some of the points already made, but it adds some other interesting ones. I'm not going to go on at length with other variations at this point, but I do want to call to your attention what I indicated at the beginning, that Gershom Scholem has a very illuminating proposal at the beginning of Major Trends in Jewish Mysticism. You can find these remarks basically developed on pages 7 through 9. What I'm giving now is a summary. In it, he suggests the following. Mysticism is a distinctive stage of religious consciousness with features of its own which mark it off as incompatible with other stages. What stands out here, and this is why I wanted to call it to your attention because I think it will prove helpful to you, is that it is located within a context of religious development, of either periods in history or stages of religious experience and understanding that can be charted, number one, in relation to each other, and at least in principle could be repeated over time, either in the same religious culture or in different ones. Now, in his general description, he speaks very, very broadly and is speaking basically about humanity. But what is also possible is that parts of what he says might be experienced again and again in different ways at different times within a given religious culture. Okay? So, what does he have to say here about the stages? First, mysticism as a form of religious consciousness is the third stage in a sequence of 3 stages. So it's going to appear last. I have to describe 2 others that he outlines and describes in greater detail. And then you will see and be able to judge for yourself the significance of what he says and the adequacy of it. So what is the first stage? Stage 1. He does not label it yet. The label comes closer to the end. He characterizes or describes it first. Stage 1. All things are full of gods. This is actually an adaptation of a statement by a famous ancient Greek philosopher, Xenophanes. And it also has other expressions in somewhat different form by other philosophers. You experience the divine wherever one turns. There are no special exercises, actions, forms of contemplation required to have this experience. There is no gulf or abyss separating humanity and God, or if you prefer, given how he started, the gods, or as an alternative, the divine. Okay? It is characteristic of what he calls the childhood of humankind. Mankind is his original term. It is also characteristic of what is sometimes called the mythical epoch in human history. The immediate consciousness that someone having such experiences has is one of the interrelationship and interdependence of things. There is a kind of essential unity which precedes the duality of different types of creatures or persons in the natural world. So in a certain sense, all creatures and even the Creator operate on the same level, interact with each other, either frequently or not frequently, but nonetheless interact with each other as if this was entirely natural and not a strange phenomenon or something devoutly longed for. He points out in conclusion of his description of stage one that nature is the scene of the relation between man and God, or man and the gods, at this stage. Think of it in perhaps these terms. If you are working within a polytheistic framework, the forces of nature can be personified by the gods. Trees are not just beautiful living things, they are gods themselves. So are oceans, so are streams. Thunderclouds are divine and a sign of the presence of a thunder god, all right? And one can interact with that god. One can also be afraid. But there are a whole variety of natural interactions, and this is occasionally frightening, occasionally very attractive and rewarding, but it is part of everybody interacting on the same level of at least experience, if not of standing and mortality vis-a-vis immortality. If you're working within a monotheistic framework, what would be the equivalent of this? Think back to Genesis 1, 2, and 3, but especially 2 and 3, where God creates human beings, fashions them out of the dust of the earth, breathes life into them. In Genesis, I believe it's chapter 2 near the end, we have the basis of creating Adam out of the individual Adam, out of the dust, but Eve out of the rib of Adam. So there's a contrast between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, as you'll recall. But the key point here is that where would Adam and Eve go for a walk? In the Garden of Eden. And where does God go for a walk? In the cool of the day, no less. In the Garden of Eden. They're in the same domain. They can interact. It's only after the fruit of the tree in the center of the garden, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, when that fruit has been consumed, that something very fundamental changes and leads to the expulsion from Eden. And there things change. There the closeness with God that was so natural is at this point removed. Not altogether, but it definitely changes, okay? And that represents the beginning of a change to another stage. So what is stage 2? Stage 2 represents the breakthrough of what he calls, Shalom calls, classical religion. In this stage, the dream harmony of God, man, and the universe is upset. It is disturbed. By some readings, it is even destroyed. Human beings become isolated from other elements that were familiar and close by at the dream stage, the primitive mythical stage of human consciousness. In classic form, he suggests, religion signifies, and now it's classical religion, not primitive religion. Classical religion signifies that there is a vast abyss between God, who is infinite and transcendent, and that therefore means beyond and apart from human beings in their daily life, and man, who is finite and who is in many respects separate from God and separate increasingly from other human beings. There can be conflicts. We get the story of Cain and Abel, for example. We get all of the conflicts between the siblings and other relatives in the book of Genesis, some of which can be quite harrowing, all right? So this represents the second stage in the furtherance of this description. He says, man becomes aware of an essential duality or gulf between the divine and human domains. Can this gulf or abyss be crossed? The answer is yes, but notice how. It's different from what we thought of, or he thought of and suggested before. Namely, it can be crossed only by means of a voice. God's voice giving guidance, and in even more concrete form, laws, and it can likewise be crossed by man's voice. In what form? In the act of prayer. This abyss is indeed absolute. It can't be really bridged in that you cross over to the other side and somehow stay there again. You recapture the original intimacy. Not for any length of time. In that sense, it can't really be bridged. It might be ephemerally bridged, briefly bridged, and then remembered. What does this represent, at least within, let's say, biblical narrative? This is represented by the expulsion from Eden. The flaming sword, if you'll recall from Genesis 3, which turns in every which direction and prevents any re-entry ever again into the Garden of Eden. In rabbinic literature, you may also remember that God, in a number of Agadot, is presented as being achareha pargod. The word, the Aramaic word pargod, used in the Targumim especially, and in some Agadot as well, refers to a curtain. And this curtain separates God from all other creatures whom God has produced. So what is the scene of religion on the second stage, or in the second stage? It is not nature. It has now turned out to be, the scene is the scene of moral and religious action on the plane of history. In a word, the scene has shifted from nature to history. The interactions between human beings with one another and other creatures within the natural world too, and especially with God. There is some ability to have relationship. It is likewise temporary, and it is over a much greater chasm through time. Most of the time, there isn't direct awareness, much less communication between the divine and the human. Which leads us now to the third stage, mysticism. Mysticism here begins by recognizing the gulf, its reality, and its profundity. But mysticism then launches the quest to overcome that abyss, to cross it, to bridge it. The pathway for doing so is understood to be real, that it can actually be done, but it is hidden. It is, in certain respects, secret. The mystic who is able to discover that pathway will have special powers of understanding or interpretation, and will be able to help put together the broken pieces that were dashed by the religious cataclysm that created the abyss, be it the disobedience to the commandment in Eden, or be it all of the events of human history, partially recorded, let's say, in Genesis, in which things so often go wrong. Where Lamech sings of all of the people he has killed and can in the future kill to get his way, where humanity can corrupt itself to the point where God wishes to eliminate humanity altogether, and the Joseph story, the conflict with the brothers, and the enslavement of the Israelites, or at least the entree to the enslavement of the Israelites, all being of a piece. So where does this go? The aim of the mystic is to restore the old unity on a new plane. And that plane is the scene in which, or on which, mystical experience takes place. What is it? The soul of human beings. Each one of our souls. That is the scene. It is not history writ large. It is not nature writ large. It is the souls of individual people. And that is the world where mythology and the world of revelation and law and divine teaching and even encounter with the divine can come together again. So the soul becomes the pathway back from the abysmal multiplicity of things in the world which so often fall into conflict and do harm, to experience in its place the divine reality, once again creating a kind of primordial unity that can be experienced by human beings, and reviving, I might add, mythical thinking, but in new forms. What forms would you say? Well, of reinterpreting narratives about the past, reinterpreting laws, reinterpreting poems, reinterpreting expressions of sacred literature and divine instruction in new ways. They will have a hidden aspect. That's why they represent the sodot, and you may recall that the mystical reading of biblical and other texts is often called Torat HaSod, the doctrine by which the sod is expressed and disclosed to those who understand how to interpret. And so that is where the soul can actually achieve some recapturing and re-experiencing of at least elements, temporarily, of the close relationships between the divine and the human and the natural that were associated with stage one. So there is the broad introduction to mysticism per se. I'm going to take a short break and be right back. And our focus now will be on the article by Moshe Idel under the title Mysticism. Now, resuming with Moshe Idel's discussion in the article Mysticism, I want to characterize the high points or highlights of what he has to say about theosophic mysticism. He speaks of it as a mode of mystical experience. He also uses as an equivalent adjective, so I want to mention the synonym, moderate mysticism. I also want to caution you that the other version of mysticism, which I associated and he also calls ecstatic, does not mean extreme mysticism. He's going to characterize that as intensive as opposed to moderate. So don't worry, we're not training mystical extremists or studying them either. So what are the main points to be noted here? I'm going to go through them one by one, and where possible to give some examples drawn both from his own article, but in the appropriate rubric or under the appropriate heading, and in some cases from outside his own treatment of the issue. So number one, with regard to moderate or theosophic mysticism, theosophic meaning involving wisdom, hence Sophia Sophic, about God and things related to God. That's what theosophic connotes. If we ask, what does this type of mysticism call for? The answer is this. It is the type of mysticism that focuses on secret wisdom regarding both the concealed and the expressed aspects of God. By expressed, we mean revealed. Aspects of God as a divine person that have been mentioned in sacred literature, the Tanakh, in rabbinic lore, and so on and so forth. Given names, So we can speak of God's justice or God's mercy and the strength of God, the Chad of Nai HaGevurah, V'Hatiferet, and so on and so forth. This will be important. But in addition to that, there are concealed aspects of God, and maybe even more than just aspects, because God is always hidden behind that curtain or beyond the clouds and so on and so forth. The basic distinction is captured actually by two terms which you have probably encountered before. The experienced aspects are called the Sephirot, and I will simply leave it untranslated, but at a later point we will discuss what the term might mean. And we'll at least characterize it at this point as the expressed aspects of God, the revealed aspects of God, if you wish, the personality traits of God. And the other is characterized, the hidden, by Ein Sof, having no end, no limit, and by the way, no capacity to be expressed, simply because it goes beyond, in an unlimited way, an infinite way, anyone's capacity to express. What is the task here? To contemplate the structure of the divine personality, and by doing so, ultimately to influence it. So the accent here is on contemplation in order to achieve some mystical awareness and wisdom regarding God. And going along with it, hopefully as a consequence of the wisdom one acquires, is what is called theurgy, Theurgy. Theurgy represents influencing God, having some direct affect upon God. All right? To give an example of this, let me read to you from a number of short passages in a very fine article by Rabbi Morris Feierstein. It's called God's Need for the Commandments in Medieval Kabbalah. It appears in Conservative Judaism back in 1982. And he mentions the following examples. Number one, how does man act piously? And piously is here expressed by the word chesed, with regard to his God. And the answer is through the study of Torah. For everyone who learns Torah does chesed to his God, as it is written, and then there's a quotation from Deuteronomy 33:26, quotes, who rides the heavens with your help. This is, in Hebrew, Rochev Shamayim Be'ezrecha. God is the one who is described as riding the heavens, but notice this last word, with your help. Now that's a literal reading, Be'ezrecha. The New JPS translation, which you can find on simply consulting the same text, says instead, to help you, meaning to help you, the human being, or the member of the people Israel. But reading it in a somewhat more literal way, notice it's God who is being helped by you, member of the people Israel. All right? So that is how one does chesed to God, a kindness to God. Second example, Rabbi Berechia expounds, what is the meaning of the verse in Exodus 25, verse 2? And you shall take an offering, a terumah, for me. The question is really about what does me refer to. God said to Israel, raise me as an offering with your prayers. So God can be raised up, exalted, put in a higher, stronger, more comprehending state. You're aware of more things when you can see further, higher up, presumably. And how does one do this? By offering prayers. That constitutes truma, and notice it has an effect on God. That is one of the goals of theosophic mysticism. And the medium for doing it, prayer. Third and final example. Rabbi Rehumai said, "Were it not for the righteous and pious of Israel, who raised me over the whole world with their merits," this is God presumably speaking, there's a passage that is, or a portion of the passage that is left out. There are 3 dots. So something is missing. It goes on to add the following. And from the heart is nourished, and from them the heart is nourished, and the heart nourishes them. I'll repeat this and then explain it. Were it not for the righteous and pious of Israel who raised me, i.e. God, over the whole world with their merits, the merits of the righteous of Israel, from them the heart is nourished, from the righteous of Israel, the heart of God is nourished. And the heart, whose heart? I think you would know here the answer is God's heart, nourishes them in return. Okay, so there's a double effect. By the kindnesses of Israel, by the righteousness of Israel, God is exalted, God is raised, and he is nourished in his heart. And as a consequence of that, likewise the heart of Israel is likewise nourished. So those are 3 examples of this first point. Second, again regarding moderate or theosophic mysticism. What type does it belong to? Edel classifies it as gnomic mysticism. This is the adjective taken from the Greek word nomos, meaning law, or the rule, the prevailing rule. So this is a form of mysticism which is, in a word, legitimate. It is not at odds with the sacred literature or the laws, okay? One achieves the goal of having this kind of mystical experience of wisdom and the effect on God by the study of Torah, also by the study of the Talmud, and broadly speaking, probably rabbinic lore and Agadah. But to study them in a mystical way, that becomes entirely legitimate. Why would anything of the sacred literature of Israel be illegitimate? And reading them with a new level of meaning is also characteristic of reading the literature. So this kind of approach, the gnomic form of mysticism, is not dangerous in itself. It is not illegitimate, which would make it dangerous. And it enables those who study this divine wisdom, otherwise secret, it enables them to decipher hidden symbols to get new levels of meaning. Third, what is the activity that takes place by one who engages in theosophic mystical study? Well, the answer is it is the activity associated with the rabbinic sages and incumbent likewise on all students of the rabbinic sages, and not restricted to an elite few. The path is an exoteric one. It is capable of being made public. Now, this was not always a characteristic of devotees of mysticism, even reading rabbinic texts or biblical texts. There were those who in the early days of medieval mysticism were very inclined to limit what they had to teach on the subject to a select few of their elite students. But it came to be something that could be taught to others and in principle should have been because of the value of this hidden wisdom. Next, what can be said about the activity itself? What is its focus, for example? Well, the focus of, and this is fourth on my list, the focus is contemplation aimed at understanding the Sefirot. Again, what this refers to for our purposes are either God's personality traits or, if you prefer, God's attributes and powers. And what is the result of learning about these in a way that is deeper and more profound and therefore in certain ways secret? One will discover the secrets of the primordial Torah itself. And this enables one to realize things that were simply not available to even the most devoted, rigorous intellectual students of both the Bible and the Talmud. Let me read an example or two of what he means here. This is from the article itself. You can find these examples on page 644 of the article, and one other set of pages to follow. I'm on 644 right now. It's approximately 2/3 of the way down the page. It reads as follows: "Who turned the rock into a pool of water?" The quotation is from Psalm 114, verse 8. This refers to Rabbi Akiva and Ben Azai. You'll remember these figures, of course, from many Agadot, who in the beginning of their careers were unproductive, like rocky soil, and for whom, due to their toil and asceticism for the sake of the study of Torah, the Holy One, blessed be He, opened new paths into the Torah, so that the words of the study houses of Hillel and Shammai were not able to stand up to the words of those two being, again, Rabbi Akiva and Ben Azai. They obviously are of a later generation than the Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai. And it goes on. "And as for those Torah passages whose meanings were previously hidden to the world, Rabbi Akiva came and explicated them. So it is written in the book of Job, 28:7. From the issuing of tears he bound together streams and brought to light that which was hidden." This verse alludes to the fact that the eyes of Rabbi Akiva beheld the Merkavah, the divine chariot, from the book of Ezekiel, as you'll recall, in the manner in which it was beheld by the prophet Ezekiel. Thus, one verse, Psalm 114:8, says, "Who turned the rock into a pool of water." Here we're talking about God as the rock, and the rock now flows, giving life, giving water. What is the water? The secret interpretations into God's nature and how God behaves. Okay? So that is an example of the contemplative activity and the wisdom that comes from it. There's one other example that can be noted. I want to call your attention to it. You can find it on pages 652, 653 of our article, Mysticism by Moshe Idel. And it reads as follows. It starts at the bottom of 652. Torah. It contains both open and closed sections. This indicates an architectonic structure that suggests one form of man who is constructed in the holy and pure image of God, or divinity. Just as the human body, the limbs are connected to each other, so too in the Torah this function is fulfilled by the closed sections. We're talking about human-like limbs that are connected together by the closed sections, meaning continuous sections without interruption and blank spaces, of the Torah. By the way, the human-like body of whom or what? And the answer is primordial man with a capital P and a capital M. And what does primordial man stand for? It stands for the system of Sfirot, or what in the Bible could have been characterized as the divine entourage, all the powers that surround God when God is convening to make major judgments about things in human history. To give you a sense of what this means, I'm going to finish the passage and then show you what a diagram of this human-like form of primordial man looks like. But he goes on. The Torah portions, "And it came to pass when Pharaoh had let the people go." This is from Exodus 17, Parashat Beshalach. "And the mystery of the song, thus sang Moses," this is Exodus 15, the Song of the Sea. Both of these examples, the Exodus and the Song of the Sea, are about God's power. And what do these songs point to? The form of the arm of God. Okay, so now we have limbs that are connected. Now a specific reference to the arm of God. And then the passage goes on and concludes. And the Torah portion, give ear, ye heavens, Ha'ashimu, Deuteronomy 32:1, refers to the divine ears. So now the divine ears are associated with primordial man, and primordial man represents the spherotic system, the revealed aspects of God portrayed in human form. So this reference to the divine ears continues, and the portion then saying Israel, this is Numbers 21:17, contains the mystery of the signs of the covenant, one of which would presumably have to do with circumcision, but you'll have to check out the exact verse and its context. Thus is the Torah called so, meaning reference, giving a reference that is etymologically related to the word hora'ah, for it indicates the form of the divinity. So this is a kind of summary of the various verses that suggest that the revealed aspects of God, God's attributes and powers, the sphirot, can be portrayed in human form as primordial man. They're taken, by the way, from the works of Rabbi Yosef Hamdan in his commentary on the mitzvot. Now, what is the depiction of this? This comes from the material that I distributed to you the other day. I'm going to walk it over so that you can see it. This is the representation of primordial man. The 10 divine attributes, sphirot. This renders sphirot as spheres. I'm not entirely sure that's going to be particularly helpful, but at least you can see that we have the differently named spheres. Keter, with the crown up here. Bina, here. Intelligence, associated with the head. Chokhmah, likewise, wisdom, associated with the head. Notice Tiferet is where the heart is located. Pachad and Chesed, sometimes you'll have Din associated with the arm of God, and Chesed or Rachamim with the other arm. Okay, and then Malchut is down near the bottom. Malchut is one of the terms for the Shekhinah, which is closest to the human world in which we all move. So there you have a different set of examples that I hope will be helpful to you. Fifth on the list, what is the aim of engaging in this kind of theosophic mystical study? And the aim is to understand the secrets of what makes for harmony within God and what makes for disharmony within God. Why? Not simply for the knowledge, but in order to enact harmony, to produce, generate, bring about harmony within God by means of one's study and by means of one's performance of the mitzvot. In this sense, the goal is transformative. It is meant to transform God, the sphirot, taken collectively, into a more harmonious, functioning state than is otherwise the case because of either the abandonment of study or because of all of the sins and crimes and tragedies and inflicted sufferings in history. So that goal is going to transform God, but it has a conformative meaning. To what does the meaning conform? The meaning is dictated by the verses of Scripture. It conforms to what the verses say, even though there's a secret level of meaning to them, and likewise the statements of the rabbis in Agadot and statements of law in the Talmud and other sources. Okay? So that ends the fifth characteristic. Who is the beneficiary of the exercise? This is number 6. I think this is already obvious, but let me specify it just for the sake of complete clarity. God is going to be the first beneficiary, and then humanity. Because without the human activity, God would be in a weakened and less exalted state, and with the human activity of study for the sake of acquiring hidden wisdom, mystical wisdom regarding God. We will ultimately repair God and bring about an unimpeded flow of divine energy, to use the preferred language of a number of 20th century interpreters, rather than the shefa, the divine overflow or abundance. We will have an unimpeded flow coming to humanity when it's needed and where it's needed. And the last point I want to make is about what group of rabbis are associated with this particular tradition of mystical study and interpretation. It originates, according to Edel, in the early Tannaitic circles, associated with, and we can not be surprised by the identification, with the school of Rabbi Akiva. Remember, for him, the letters and even the designs of the letters had secret meanings. And it is likewise shared by Shimon Bar Yochai, who was, you'll recall, one of the figures most intimately associated with and associated also as the virtual founder of what is contained in the Zohar. And then it is passed on through generations, ultimately to be picked up by Rabat of HUC-JIR, a great French legal decisor and interpreter with mystical interests of his own. The Ramban, that is Moses Nachmanides, operating at the end of the 13th century, 1194 is when he was born. He's operating primarily in the 13th century. He's born at the end of the 12th. And the Rashba, Ibn Adret, and ultimately culminating in a figure who is really part of the modern era, even though his practice doesn't usually identify him as part of modernity, and that is Elijah the Gaon of Vilna Gaon. So all of these figures represent great scholars and thinkers who are associated with this tradition of mystical activity and reflection. I'm going to stop here and pick up on this theme, moving now to the intensive ecstatic tradition of mystical activity, and characterize it before we go on to define more about what we could say about the Sfirot, and also examine some additional passages. So I thank you for your attention thus far. I look forward to picking it up in our next session.